Rising is a 2014 dystopian science fiction novel by Pierce Brown. It's won a handful of awards and is currently a book talk darling. I knew about this book generally because I know a handful of people who have read it, but I actually had a funny reason for wanting to read it. I'm currently attempting to write a novella, and it may or may not involve color-coded social classes, red, yellow, and green. I was about halfway through plotting out the story when this book suddenly popped into my head. I double-checked the summary, and let me tell you, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw that it did more or less the same thing that I was trying to do. I was like, oh fuck, it's been done before. People are gonna think I copied the plot of this story since it's so popular. I dug a little deeper and found that the color-coded class system in Red Rising is significantly different from what I have planned for my novella, so... But I was curious about the book overall once I knew the synopsis. I have mixed reviews from my friends. Some adore it, some hated it with every fiber of their beings. It sounded interesting enough, so I decided to take a crack at it. We start off with 16-year-old Darrow. He's a member of the Reds, a laboring class that lives on Mars, toiling away to make the planet ready for terraforming. Darrow lives in a society. Darrow lives in the society, which is stratified by colors. I cheated and looked up the classes on the wiki because, like hell, I'm recapping them all. Golds are on top, reds are on bottom, grays are the police class. That's all that's really relevant right now. Oh, and their leader at the tippy top of the society is a lady named Octavia Aulun. In any case, Darrow is a helldiver in charge of mining a substance called helium-3, an element necessary for terraforming planets. Mining it is the Reds' jobs, again so that Mars can one day be terraformed and made ready for colonists from a dying Earth. When Darrow was a child, his father was executed for rebelling against the Golds, the ruling class. After being lashed and singing a forbidden resistance song, Darrow's wife Io is executed the exact same way. Then Darrow is executed for cutting her body down and secretly burying her. Except not. Darrow's uncle drugged him, did something, I'm not 100% clear on this, but basically he did something, and Darrow survived being executed. His body, having been squirreled away to his would-be grave by his uncle after his death, is then retrieved by the Sons of Ares, a resistance group. The group's leader, Dancer, brings Darrow to the surface of Mars, revealing that the planet has been completely terraformed. It's got grass, sky, and futuristic tech and buildings as far as the eye can see. Not only has Mars been colonized, but most of the moons and other planets in the galaxy have been as well, except for the gas giants for, obvious reasons. The future that the Reds have been slaving away to bring to fruition, one that they believed was still generations away, is already here, and has been, I cannot stress this enough, for hundreds of years. The Reds were getting fed propaganda that Earth was overcrowded and in desperate need of terraformed planets for colonization, so the Reds' work and sacrifice was supposed to be super important for humanity. But Earth is actually doing just fine, having successfully colonized the moon 700 years ago. So, Darrow's a little miffed, yeah. He agrees to join up with the Sons of Ares, who then have him physically, intellectually, and psychologically re-engineered to pass as a Gold. The idea is to make Darrow not simply a Gold, but the right kind of Gold that will allow him to go to the Institute, a school that will ostensibly allow him to ascend to high ranks in Gold society, which the Sons of Ares will then proceed to infiltrate. After passing some incredibly difficult physical and written tests, Darrow is accepted to the Institute and meets two kids on the shuttle ride there named Julian, who is nice, and Severo, who is not. We get some lore at the Institute from Arch-Governor Nero Augustus. Luna, capital of the society, rebelled against the tyranny of Earth because it, insisted that all men are created equal, and apparently that's a bad thing. Ergo, the color system is good because it keeps everyone in their proper places. He then goes on to say that the Gold kids have become spoiled and coddled, and as such will be getting their shit kicked in as part of their education. So now Darrow needs to get sorted into a house based off of the Roman gods. There's some more evaluations, yada yada yada, and Darrow is promptly sorted into House Mars. At the Institute, Darrow meets up with Cassius, who is Julian's twin. On his first night there, Darrow is dragged out of bed and has the absolute hell beaten out of him as promised. He's taken to the passage along with Julian, and the two are informed that they will have to fight to the death. Long story short, Darrow reluctantly kills Julian. It's revealed a little while later that this is a form of enforced natural selection. The Golds have it so easy that they feel they have to purge their ranks by hand sometimes. There's millions of Golds, so it really doesn't matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. The head of House Mars, Fitchner, explains that the point of the Institute is to get apprenticeships with some of the big gold families later on, but first they, once again, have to get all the privileged softness beaten the fuck out of them. The job of the students is to wage war against the others and capture the valley by any means necessary. The houses are given standards that they can use to enslave members of other houses by imprinting the standard on their foreheads. The mock war begins, and tribes quickly form in House Mars, led by Antonia, Titus, Cassius, and Severo, the last of which basically just runs around the wilderness dressed in a wolf pelt and howling at the moon. No, that's not a joke, he really does do that. Over the next several months, Darrow and Cassius grow to be good friends as they work to capture the valley. Darrow also develops some lustful inclinations towards a girl named Mustang, real name Virginia, orders the execution of a rapist, who also ends up being a red posing as a gold, and gets friendly with Severo, who is wearing wolf pelts and running around the wilderness howling at the moon still, keeping the legacy of furries alive hundreds of years in the future with his merry band of fursuit enthusiasts. They all ally themselves with Darrow. Things come to a head when the Jackal, a dreaded figure from House Pluto, drops a video to Cassius that reveals Darrow is the one who killed Julian, who, to remind you, is Cassius's brother. Cassius lashes out and attacks Darrow, critically injuring him. When Darrow wakes up, he finds that Mustang has found and been looking after him. The two grow close over the next few weeks, with Darrow protecting Mustang during a raid on their camp and caring for her when she eventually falls ill herself. It's soon revealed that the Proctors, the head of the houses, are sabotaging Darrow because the Jackal is the son of Arch-Governor Augustus. This is the guy who executed Darrow's wife, Io. Darrow is, again, understandably pissed off. He and Mustang build an army of Oathbreakers, which are the slaves that didn't play along during the game's rules of being subservient to whoever branded them with their standards. In this way, Darrow wins a lot of loyalty from the other students. Eventually, Darrow's army proceeds to lay siege on House Jupiter. The strongest flee while leaving the weakest behind. A boy named Lucian surrenders without a fight. It is soon revealed that he is, in fact, the Jackal. Darrow confronts him, and the Jackal confirms that he got his name from being a cannibal. Rather than be enslaved towards the beginning of the game, he trapped himself and a handful of other House Pluto members in a cave-in. And then he went Hannah Washington on them. Oh, but it gets worse. Darrow tells Lucian that he can leave if he cuts off his own hand. He, of course, assumes that Lucian won't do this because, why would you? And then Lucian proceeds to say, bet, and saws his own fucking hand off, smiling as he does.
Boy ain't right.
Holy fucking shit. The Proctors now intervene, and Lucian escapes. Darrow, Severo, and the Howlers go to chase Lucian down, but Apollo's Proctor intervenes. He says that the Proctors have Mustang and will kill her if Darrow doesn't lose his next encounter with Lucian. In the ensuing fight, Darrow actually kills Apollo's Proctor. Intending to save Mustang, he tells Severo and the Howlers that they're going to Olympus, which is where all the Proctors are. Darrow and his crew proceed to take Olympus surprisingly easily, given that it's full of proctors who ostensibly should be the ones in charge of the show here, but okay. They find Mustang and instruct her to go deal with Lucian. Soon after Darrow returns, he speaks with Fitchner, who drops an absolutely wild revelation. Mustang is Lucian's twin sister, and she's just been sent off to go deal with him. Darrow is understandably rip shit about the fact that he was falling in love with the daughter of the Arch-Governor that literally murdered his wife. Darrow's army attacks House Mars and takes over. He finds Cassius alive inside the castle, and Cassius declares that there is now a blood feud between them. If they ever meet again, one will be forced to kill the other. Gee, where have I heard that before? The final twist of the novel comes in the form of Mustang returning with her brother bound and gagged. She has not betrayed Darrow. The drafters, the gold-seeking apprentices by watching the war games, arrive, signaling the end of the games. Arch-Governor Augustus approaches Darrow, and a deal is struck. Darrow won't say a word about Augustus rigging the game in favor of his son, and in turn he will make Darrow an apprentice of his household and fast-track him onto any career path he wants. Darrow accepts, and that's the end of the book. Okay, so this one was interesting. First of all, the writing. It was a lot. There are a lot of very short, choppy sentences in this novel. I did this, he did that, then this happened, then that happened. And no, it's not limited to fight scenes. I'd be way more forgiving if it was. I haven't read any of Pierce Brown's other works, so I can't tell if that's a stylistic choice or if that's just the way he writes. I lean towards the latter, although it's worth mentioning that this book was released in 2014. As I record this, it is 2025, so it's been over a decade. It's possible his writing style has evolved since then. There are odd choices made in the writing too, mostly involving word order and phrasing. Like, there were multiple instances where I had to go back and reread paragraphs because I legitimately could not tell if it was worded weirdly or obscurely, or if I was just, blue screening after a day at work. For example, on page 167, it's like my Lambda drill team whenever a head talk would take an hour sick. He elaborates by suggesting that this means the supervisor would sneak off for a smoke, but without that context, I would not know what was being said. He's taking an hour sick? What the hell does that mean? You don't take an hour sick. You pretend to be sick for an hour. Take an hour sick is the weirdest way that sentence could have been worded. The dialogue was also kind of hit and miss. Half the time it was fine, and half the time it felt like the author was forgetting how people actually talk to one another. There's a lot of speechifying too, which really kind of grated on me. The author also uses a lot of metaphors that just don't really make a lot of sense. On page 105, I watch a hollow of golds in battle, and my heart falls into my stomach. They fight like a summer song, not like the thunderous, monstrous obsidians, but like birds banking into a fresh wind. They fight like a summer song does not make sense. I know what he's trying to say, that the Golds are unnaturally talented and graceful fighters, but I can only conclude that from the following two sentences where he contrasts their fighting with the thunderous obsidians and compares them to birds. The author could have just used the bird metaphor, and that would have worked just fine if you put aside the fact that this is a weird metaphor for Darrow, who's lived underground his whole life and probably has very little experience with birds, but it works for the audience, and that's what matters. There are a lot of authors that sometimes fall into the trap of trying to sound really profound and poetic, and so they don't always think about whether or not the metaphors and similes they're using make practical sense. Birds work. The vast majority of your audience has seen one fly before, and most birds could be described as graceful. A summer song does not really work because the vast majority of the audience has wildly different points of reference for what qualifies as a summer song, and not all of those points of reference are going to bring graceful to mind. There's also a lot of telling rather than showing, and a lot is spelled out for the audience. Just as an example, on page 114, Darrow is visited by a copper and two whites. To quote, a man in a copper suit gives a bow of formality. 3 whites are with him. Each has a white sigil upon their hands. First, a bow of formality is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier when I said that there was some awkward wording in the book. I would just write that as the man in the copper suit gave a formal bow, or the man in the copper suit performed a formal bow. That runs just a little bit smoother. Second, here's the thing. I'm a third of the way through the book. I already know that the various colors have sigils on their hands and arms that reflect their caste. I also know that most colors are very, very easy to distinguish at a glance because they are all described as having features reflective of their classes. So you don't need to tell me that the whites, who you know are whites because they obviously look like whites, have white sigils on their hands. You've already told me that the castes have specific sigils on their hands. So I can conclude that the whites that have just walked into the room have white sigils on their hands without you telling me. If there is something specifically relevant about those sigils, such as what subcategory of whites they belong to, then that's fine. But otherwise, I'm smart enough to figure it out on myself. You don't have to tell me. This book is not young adult. A lot of reviewers have described it that way, and I don't know if it maybe was categorized that way in 2014, got recategorized later on, a la Sarah J. Maas. But it is classified by the publisher and most everywhere I can find as an adult science fiction novel today. I think a lot of people are flagging this as young adult because it reads like young adult. The genre is known for being very telling instead of showing in its writing styles, and Red Rising is absolutely that. There is a lot of telling in this book, like turning to the audience and explaining everything instead of just letting us deduce anything from context clues kind of telling. Another example of this is during the Archgovernor's speech on pages 121 to 123. Occasionally, Darrow, in his internal narration, pipes up and reminds us how pissed off he is and how much the Archgovernor sucks. And it's like, bro, I know he hates them. You don't have to remind me every few minutes. The guy literally executed his wife. I can figure that out on my own. Let the Archgovernor talk for now and save the big paragraph of Darrow's anger until the end of the speech when Eo's execution specifically gets mentioned. A certain amount of telling in a book is fine. Sometimes it's just better to dedicate a sentence or paragraph to clarify an important point than spreading vague hints across, 10 pages. It's a judgment call that authors have to make depending on the kind of book they're writing, the POV they're writing from, and the audience they're looking to reach. And obviously, if you're aiming for a younger audience that lacks the reading skills to pick up on context clues, you might be inclined to be a little more straightforward. If this book was categorized as YA, I would be marginally more forgiving about how straightforward it is. But it's categorized as an adult book, so I'm holding it to a higher standard. Aside from that, on the writing, I don't know why Goodman was italicized throughout the book, since it didn't always seem to be an emphasized word, and I don't know why so many of the nouns in this book were capitalized. To reference my earlier example, sigil did not need to be capitalized. That would be like me capitalizing tattoo or cherry every time I write the words. A sigil is a noun. It generally describes a sign or a symbol. If sigil was being used as a proprietary name, kind of like Apple, then it would be appropriate to capitalize it. Otherwise, you're just unnecessarily capitalizing a noun. The storytelling was a bit off, too. I really think we should have spent more time with Darrow as a Red and his society before he gets taken by the Sons of Ares. Give us a deeper idea of what life as a Red is like. Show me Darrow's family more so that I have a better idea of who it is that he's fighting for. This book has been compared to the Hunger Games, and I have a much better idea of what life in District 12 is like for Katniss. I also know who she loves, like Primrose and Gale. Admittedly, it's a bit easier for Suzanne Collins since Katniss isn't exactly a social butterfly, but I have a firm idea of who's important to Katniss and why they're important. Even Rue, someone who isn't around for very long in Katniss's life, is fleshed out enough that I really feel something when she dies, and I understand why Katniss mourns her so deeply. With Darrow, I know who's important to him, Io, his mother, brother, uncle, cousins, but we get so little insight as to who they are as people, and why it is that Darrow is so intensely devoted to them and their well-being, that they're almost like cardboard cutouts. Of course Darrow fights for his family. They are standard good mother and good brother and good sister. His uncle's the only one that actually has a drop of personality in him, and he is gone just as quickly as the others are. If we had spent more time with the Reds, seeing the ways in which their lives are made difficult by the Golds on a more intimate basis, it would have connected more. Darrow's relationship with Io is so incredibly crucial to the plot, it's literally what kicks everything off, but we barely see her. We're told that Io's so great and that everyone loves her, but we don't really get to see why. It all just goes by so quickly. The war game section is better in this respect, but not by much. Most of the characters are just very, very thin. I sincerely can't think of anything to say about most of them. I liked Severo, feral little furry that he is. He's a combative, weird, intelligent, and rough little dude. Fitchner was similar, and I liked him well enough. Obviously, the Jackal made an impression on me, too, with the whole, shit! But the rest of them are varying shades of nice, mean, arrogant, evil, what have you. They don't really stand out. There's no depth to their characterizations, and I feel nothing for them. When the odd character was killed here and there, it really didn't drag much emotion out of me. As I said before, the storytelling overall just moves so fast, and that leaves little room for subtlety, character building, or anything else that isn't surface deep. Which leads me to Darrow. I struggle to pin down Darrow. Arrogance is definitely something that stood out before and after Io's death. If it had just been towards the Golds, I would have understood it because, yeah, of course he's going to feel he has some moral superiority over them. They're assholes. They're oppressing his people and they killed his wife. But you see shades of it in the beginning too when he razzes his uncle and older Reds for being less willing to take risks. Because I saw those shades of egotism in the beginning, it didn't feel like he really changed after Io's death. It felt like he was always that way, and fighting against the Golds just gave him a chance to indulge that arrogance without it being quite as obvious. He's angry too, although that trait kind of disappears somewhat once he's in the war game. I like to think it's because he's getting to know the Golds and learning that not all of them are callous monsters, but again, there's a telling problem in this book, and that means if the author neglects to tell me something and also fails to show me in a meaningful way, I can't really assume that it exists. Mind you, these aren't criticisms, me calling Darrow arrogant or angry. Those are just the only real character traits of his that I can definitively pin down. So don't think that this is me passing a character judgment on Darrow being like, oh, he's mean and I don't like him. It's nothing to do with that. Those are just the character traits of his that I noticed. So while Darrow is better developed than a lot of the characters in this book, that's not a very high bar to climb over. The fact that Darrow only got one question wrong out of thousands on that really important and really difficult exam towards the beginning of the book gave me major Gary Stu vibes. That could have been mitigated by the author showing us Darrow working his ass off to study for it, because then I could have said, oh, okay, he just worked hard and it paid off. But everyone, even Darrow, is shocked at how well he did, and it's treated as this, like, miraculous, oh my god, you're the perfect special chosen one moment. And it just kind of made me cringe. I wasn't into it. I was pleased to see that Darrow had to struggle more during the war arc. He had to make a choice about whether or not to kill Julian. He made the choice to kill and suffer consequences for it later on with Cassius. Most of what happened in the war arc did not come across as being handed to Darrow up until the end. The storming of Olympus was kind of ridiculous. You cannot convince me that Darrow was the first recruit in all this time to think of going after the Proctors, and yet it was almost comically easy for him and his band of teenagers to capture Olympus. And they face zero consequences for it, at least as of the ending of this book. I haven't read the second one. I don't know. Maybe there are consequences that come in the second one. Also worth mentioning is the society at large. Gonna be real with you, Chief, I could not for the life of me keep track of the terminology in this book. Golds, reds, pinks, violets, sure, okay, I have that. But then you have high and low colors, iron gold versus bronze gold, peerless, scarred, pixie. It was a lot to keep track of. And I say that as someone who read A Clockwork Orange and loved it. I respect the effort has gone into the world building, but it was confusing at times. I hate to make another Hunger Games comparison, but I keep thinking of the districts. While I had some trouble remembering which was which at times, it was relevant in the context of the games because tributes from different districts had different skill sets that made them dangerous, or not so much. Districts 1 and 2 were rich and close to the capital, so they had special training. Finnick Odair was from District 4, which specialized in fishing, so he was really good at using a spear. Likewise, Johanna Mason was from the district that specialized in lumber, so she was really good with an axe. Yeah, you're not always going to remember which is which or tell them apart from memory, but I feel like Suzanne Collins took more time to reinforce which districts were which in the most important ways, and she made them relevant at times too to help you remember. In Red Rising, we get quick flickers of the color system before getting shoved into the war games where only the golds matter. I will say this, I thought it was clever to make the naming schemes relate to the color, like AU being added to names to indicate that they came from the gold class, except for Darrow, who apparently is Olycos, because apparently it's been confirmed that the Reds are basically Scottish or Irish, or at least they are where he's from. I don't know, apparently this is something that gets confirmed later on in the series. It's not brought up in Red Rising. I also like that the author explored the nuance of the golds, acknowledging that a lot of them are products of their environment and upbringing and aren't necessarily evil. I do think that that adds a shade of gray, no pun intended, to the world building instead of just going whole hog on the idea that they're evil by nature and can't be redeemed. Ergo, Darrow is, completely morally justified in just killing them all. So I didn't hate this book, but I can't say I'll be looking forward to the sequel. I'm just not interested enough in any of these characters or the story to see where it goes.